Elizabeth Lopez and I grew up together in the same military compound. She had a crush on the gentle boy next door, Jimmy Ellis. I liked the aloof and domineering boy who lived downstairs, Louis James. Each of us pursued our own person, until one day I discovered that both Jimmy Ellis and Louis James had fallen for the new girl, Linda Perry. I held on for a while before giving up. Elizabeth, on the other hand, insisted she wanted to keep trying. I scolded her harshly, then chose the cleanest solution. I left the country for graduate school. 7 years later, I returned to China. Elizabeth came to pick me up at the airport. Smiling, I asked how things were going between her and Jimmy. She took a sip of wine, fell silent for a moment, then quietly said, "Emma, I've decided to give up on Jimmy." To be honest, I never thought I'd hear those words from Elizabeth. After all, back when things fell apart between Louis and me, I had tried so hard to talk sense into her. "Elizabeth, let it go. They've both been completely bewitched by Linda Perry. In their eyes, she's some flawless white lotus, while we're nothing but poisonous man-eating vines. It's just a guy. Come abroad with me. Out of sight, out of mind." I remember Elizabeth simply smiled at me. She was always beautiful. Ever since we were young, she had been the class belle, brilliant in both academics and character, with a gentle, graceful personality. That's why I never understood what kind of spell Jimmy had fallen under, to like someone like Linda, who didn't hold a candle to Elizabeth in any way. Elizabeth gently shook her head and said, "Emma, I love Jimmy. This has nothing to do with him." It was the kind of saccharine line that could rot your teeth, but when she said it, all it did was make people sigh at her sincerity. I let out a long breath and scolded her again. "All right, fine. I just hope you won't regret this one day." And then I left. Elizabeth probably knew I didn't like hearing anything about Jimmy or Louis, so she never mentioned them in our calls. But we shared many mutual friends, and there was no avoiding it. I often heard gossip about her and Jimmy through others. I heard that after Linda bounced back and forth between Louis and Jimmy, she finally settled with Louis. I heard Jimmy was heartbroken and drunk out of his mind, and that Elizabeth stayed by his side through it all. I heard Elizabeth enrolled in the same university as Jimmy. I heard the two of them finally got together. Later, Jimmy even posted an official announcement on social media. It was a photo of Elizabeth, probably taken at a restaurant, with a stunning night skyline in the background. She was smiling radiantly into the camera, her eyes brimming with gentleness and love, so vivid it seemed to reach through the screen. Their hands were tightly clasped together. At the time, I was genuinely happy for her. She had loved Jimmy since we were little. After all these years, she had finally waited for the clouds to part and the moon to shine through. So I left a comment, "Congratulations." After that, I got busy with graduation and rarely kept in touch with folks back home. Until today, when I finally returned. Elizabeth picked me up, and we sat down for a drink. I casually asked how things were going with Jimmy. I thought she'd blush, maybe look shy or giddy with happiness. What I didn't expect, what never even crossed my mind, was for her to say so calmly, so nonchalantly, "Emma, I've decided to give up on Jimmy." I blinked, stunned, and looked at Elizabeth. She was gazing quietly into her glass. The dim, secluded lamplight cast a glow from behind her, hiding her face in shadow. All I could see were her lowered lashes, thick and delicate, like wings about to take flight. Her voice was flat, as though she were talking about something utterly trivial. I hesitated, then asked, "Weren't you two already engaged?" She let out a quiet laugh. Elizabeth had always been gentle, graceful in her manners, warm in her interactions. But this was the first time I had seen such cold sarcasm on her face. She looked up at me, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. Her voice was light. "Even married couples get divorced. What's an engagement in comparison?" I fell silent, unsure what to say. Elizabeth and I had polar opposite personalities. She was quiet and tender, I was outspoken and headstrong. When we were kids, our parents used to joke about swapping daughters. My mom wished I were a little more like Elizabeth. Her mom hoped Elizabeth could be a bit more like me. But after I pinned one of the boys in the compound to the ground and beat him until he bawled for his mom, her mom never brought it up again. Back then, I was always covered in mud like a little monkey. Elizabeth, on the other hand, wore dresses and polished shoes, her hair in perfect princess braids. She'd follow me quietly, carrying my school bag, and when I was beating up the boy who had tugged her braid, she'd stand watch for me, anxiously whispering, "Emma, the teacher's coming." From kindergarten on, we were inseparable. Our friendship was rock solid, though we did hit a bump once. It was around the time we both started to experience our first crushes. I liked Louis. She liked Jimmy. But for a while, we both mistakenly thought the other liked the same guy we did. Blame it on all those Taiwanese dramas. We were convinced that best friends couldn't fight over the same boy, so we awkwardly tried to hide our feelings. Until one day, I couldn't take it anymore and asked her directly who she liked. She wouldn't say, so I spoke first. I like Louis. She stared at me, wide-eyed, stunned. What? You like Louis? I gave her a piercing look. So who do you like? Her face turned bright red. She lowered her head and mumbled after a long pause, Jimmy. Ew. I scrunched up my nose. You like that baby-faced poser? Always fake smiling. Who cares if he's handsome? She shot me a glare, then fired back, and Louis? Always scowling like everyone owes him money. So childish. We bickered like that, sharp-tongued and unwilling to concede, both trying to convince the other that our crush was the better man. But in the end, we both burst out laughing. She said, it's nice. Yeah. It really was. Back then, liking someone was such a simple thing. I fell for Louis because one day, a group of the boys I'd bullied for years finally decided to revolt. They ganged up to get their revenge, but just as they did, Louis, who had just moved in, took them on 1-by-10. He scoffed in disdain. So many boys picking on one girl? Pathetic. Then he reached out a hand to me. Don't be scared. What's your name? I pretended to be shy and quickly hid the rolling pin I'd been wielding behind my back. Softly, I answered, Emma Madison. He smiled, took my hand, and walked me home. What a coincidence, he said. I live just downstairs. From now on, I've got your back. With wide, innocent eyes, I nodded sweetly, much to my mother's astonishment. As for Elizabeth and Jimmy, it was even simpler. Jimmy was a year older than us, in the grade above. He was top of the class. Every school ceremony, he was the one speaking on behalf of all the students. Elizabeth was an excellent student too. I always thought her affection for Jimmy was a natural admiration between model students. Elizabeth was an excellent student too. I figured her crush on Jimmy probably stemmed from that mutual admiration that good students often have for each other. Because we all lived in the same compound, the four of us became incredibly close over time. We were practically inseparable, and for a while, we ruled the school together like golden children admired by everyone. On the day we graduated from junior high, which also happened to be my birthday, the four of us went to the seaside to celebrate. I made a solemn wish, I hope the four of us never, ever drift apart. But just a month after that wish, when we started high school, we met Linda. Linda, who worked part-time jobs and was clumsy at everything. On the very first day of school, she accidentally spilled a cup of scalding hot water all over me. I gasped from the pain, sucking in a sharp breath, unable to help myself. But before I could even react, she cried out first. Her face tilted up, eyes brimming with tears, and she stammered in panic, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I'm really, really sorry. She looked so pitiful that I held back my anger. Still, as I looked at the 2 large blisters rising on the back of my hand, I couldn't help hissing in pain. Louis, who was standing next to me, examined the burn and then shot her a cold glare. Are you blind? He snapped. She lowered her head and said nothing, tears pattering onto the floor like raindrops. The sight irritated me, so I muttered, forget it. She didn't do it on purpose. That was our first encounter. To be honest, I never paid Linda much attention after that. We were in the same class, but her presence was barely noticeable. A high school was the top school in the entire city. You were either a high-achieving academic star or the child of a very wealthy and powerful family. Linda was obviously neither. Judging from her modest clothes and the timid way she carried herself, she didn't seem to come from a privileged background. Probably the daughter of a school staff member, some students guessed. But no one really bothered to dig deeper. Times had changed. Whether you were a top student or a rich kid, everyone was too busy competing academically to waste time on bullying like you see in TV dramas. People who didn't matter were simply ignored. It was cruel, but it was the truth. Linda sat in the back corner of the classroom with a chubby boy, quiet as a shadow. The first time I really noticed her was during a dispute. Apparently, during break, her deskmate, the chubby boy, had been standing in the middle of the hallway, blocking others from passing through. A boy behind him got impatient and scoffed, throwing out a jab along the lines of, if you're that fat, don't take up the whole hallway. For once, Linda, usually so timid and quiet, stood up to defend her classmate. Her face flushed red as she said, how can you mock someone's body like that? I recognized the boy. He was from a powerful family, arrogant and sharp-tongued. Not truly malicious, but definitely prideful. Being called out like that in front of everyone, he got annoyed. He sneered at Linda and said, oh please. He's been standing there for ages. Not allowed to say anything about it now? Look at you rushing to his defense. What's the matter, got a crush on him? No wonder you're deskmates. You and that fatty really are a match made in heaven. Linda looked like the kind of person who couldn't argue even if she wanted to. Her face turned even redder, but she said nothing. Instead, her deskmate quickly distanced himself. I don't even like her, he said. A few people around the classroom chuckled. Linda stood there, humiliated. I frowned. The boy had gone too far. Sure, Linda choosing to stand up for someone unworthy was a bit foolish, but even so, this was too much. So I stepped in. Jason, I called out, raising my voice. Are you planning to stand there all day? Class is about to start. If you're late, I'll make sure your name goes on the list. Enjoy cleaning duty for a week. Jason held up his hands in surrender. All right, class representative, I'm going. He backed off, no longer arguing, and squeezed past Linda and her classmate. From the back of the room, Linda lifted her eyes to look at me. It was too far away for me to see her expression clearly, but I could feel her gaze fixed rigidly in my direction. I shrugged and turned away, unconcerned. Louis, who had been standing behind me, lazily pulled his gaze back from that side of the room as well. I heard him mutter under his breath, idiot. After that day, Linda became even quieter in class. Every time I think back to this moment, I want to slap my high school self awake. Maybe I felt sorry for her. Maybe I was just being stupid. I've never been the meddlesome type, but I've always had this faint sense of justice and compassion. That's not me bragging, that was something Elizabeth once said about me. That year, for the school anniversary celebration, our homeroom teacher said every student had to participate in a performance. I wasn't great at academics, but I was talented when it came to this kind of thing. So I put together a stage play, leads, supporting roles, set design, props. It solved the participation problem for a dozen shy classmates all at once. As class president, every submission had to go through me. But even as the deadline approached, Linda still hadn't submitted anything. I went to ask her, and she looked uncomfortable, head lowered, avoiding eye contact like she wished she could disappear. I understood immediately. So I tried to preserve her dignity, casually suggesting, hey, I still need someone to be a stone in the background for my play. Want to do that? She nodded quietly. I never imagined that this play would be the beginning of her connection with Louis. The stone was a completely unnecessary role, something I added just to help Linda save face. She dressed in the costume and stood there, motionless for the entire rehearsal. Maybe she was grateful. Maybe she took it seriously. Either way, she was committed. One time, after rehearsal, she seemed to have lost feeling in her legs. As she stumbled to her feet, Louis tossed her a water bottle and said, "You're a rock. It's just a rehearsal. Ever heard of sitting down? Idiot." I looked at Linda in surprise. Yes, it was clearly a mocking tone, but with Louis's cold and detached nature, if he truly thought someone was an idiot, he wouldn't even spare them a glance, let alone give them water and mock them with concern disguised as insult. I had actually told Linda twice before that she didn't need to be so rigid about it, that as long as she paid attention during the actual performance, it would be fine. But she was insistent on being as professional as possible, even in the role of a rock. She reacted the same way to Louis's mockery. Picking up the water bottle he had tossed her, she turned bright red with nerves and lowered her head, stammering, I was afraid of messing up the rehearsal. I just thought it'd be better to stay dedicated." Louis said nothing. Then came the day of the performance. During one of my scenes with Louis, he accidentally stepped on Linda's fingers while moving to his mark. I heard her let out a tiny gasp of pain, but she didn't move an inch. For the rest of the play, Louis seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. After the performance ended, I had to stay behind to host the rest of the event. By the time I returned backstage, I stumbled upon an unexpected scene in a quiet corner. A tall, handsome boy was standing in front of a timid girl who looked delicate and fragile. His brows were furrowed in annoyance, but his tone was unusually gentle as he said, "Give me your hand." Linda shyly held out her hand. Louis carefully unwrapped a band-aid and stuck it over her injured finger. Then, lips pressed into a thin line, he muttered, "Idiot." Seated before him, Linda looked up at him with an awkward, hopeful smile, embarrassed yet delighted by his attention, as if his soft-spoken insult were a precious gift. I stood at the corner, watching the scene unfold, momentarily frozen. I never asked Elizabeth why she decided to break up with Jimmy. To be honest, there were times I felt like she and I were the classic, villainous supporting characters from a romance novel. Just two plot devices meant to spice up the journey to the perfect, happily ever after, between the male and female leads. As for who the true male lead was, Louis or Jimmy, I no longer cared. I took a sip of wine and didn't ask Elizabeth for her reasons. I simply said, "You're already engaged. Breaking it off with Jimmy now probably won't be easy. Especially not with your family and his involved." Elizabeth smiled faintly, and I heard the weariness in her voice as she said, "Even if it's hard, it's still better than where we are now. I'm tired, Emma." She turned her head to look at me. In the warm, golden light, her eyes held none of the sorrow or heartbreak I expected. Instead, there was a quiet serenity. A kind of peace that came only after giving everything and accepting the outcome. She even smiled gently as she asked, "Do you still like Louis? You were absolutely heartbroken when you left." I laughed. Honestly, probably only Elizabeth would dare say that to my face. Yes, when I left the country back then, I had been utterly crushed. But looking back, it wasn't just because the person I liked had fallen for someone else. It was the gut-wrenching disappointment of realizing that someone I'd trusted since childhood, my friend, didn't stand by me. But all that is smoke and dust now. Whatever lingering affection I had for Louis had long since faded. These days, even just hearing his name doesn't stir a single ripple in me. I said, "If you'd gone abroad with me back then, dated a few tall, blonde, blue-eyed guys, maybe you wouldn't only now be realizing it's time to let go of Jimmy. Elizabeth, you took the long way around." She burst out laughing, raised her glass, and clinked it gently against mine. Smiling, she said, "I feel much better seeing how free-spirited you are. To be honest, Louis and Linda have been having some issues lately. They've been arguing more and more, and Louis doesn't seem to care much about her anymore. And now, with you suddenly back." She trailed off, then gave a self-deprecating chuckle, as if to explain her own decision to break off her engagement with Jimmy. But even if the prince wants to leave the stage, Linda still has a loyal knight waiting in the wings to take his place. I wasn't particularly interested in the drama between Louis and Linda. I didn't even have the curiosity to gossip. I just looked at Elizabeth. Even after all these years apart, I still knew her well. She only looked delicate on the outside. In reality, she was the most stubborn, persistent, and quietly determined among us all. She wouldn't have clung to Jimmy for so long if that weren't the case. So if she was letting him go now, that meant she'd reached the absolute end, disappointment so deep it left no room for return. Still, just to be sure, I sighed and said, "Elizabeth, if you don't let go this time, even I won't respect you anymore." Elizabeth tilted her head and smiled softly. "I won't, Emma." After that dinner, we didn't talk for quite a while. We were both busy. Elizabeth, ever the academic star, was working on a confidential scientific research project with her mentor. As for me, I had studied film and television production at USC. My graduation short film had won an award at an international student film festival. Because of my passion, I had registered a media company back home with a group of like-minded friends. Together, we had created several short films, won praise, built a fan base, and picked up numerous awards, big and small. I came back to China this time because that same graduation film had caught the attention of a prominent domestic director I deeply admired. After a few discussions, he expressed strong interest in a script concept I drafted. Once I outlined the framework, he introduced me to his editing team so we could further develop the idea. He seemed to genuinely like my work, and eventually asked if I'd be interested in joining the production crew and studying under him. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So I returned to China immediately. After 2 days of rest, and that dinner with Elizabeth, I packed my things and headed to the film set. What I didn't expect was to run into Jimmy there. As soon as the director's new project was announced, a flood of actors rushed to audition. Jimmy was there to accompany Linda. After graduation, Jimmy had taken over his family's entertainment company. Linda's college entrance exam scores were mediocre at best, but Jimmy had signed her anyway. Even though she had chosen Louis back then, it was said that Jimmy treated her extremely well, top-tier agents, first-class resources, all focused on her. But even before I returned, I'd already heard the rumors. Apparently, all that favoritism had backfired with the public. People were beginning to resent how overhyped she was. Linda, despite her hard work, still lacked real acting talent. No amount of resources had managed to make her truly shine. Instead, she was mocked online as nothing but a resource princess. Still, she had her loyal fans, people who claimed the critics were just jealous. "If you're so bitter," they said, "go find your own boyfriend who'll throw top-tier resources at you." They all thought Louis was the one backing her. Jimmy seemed surprised to see me, but quickly recovered. With the same warm, big brother smile he used to have, he approached me and said, "You came back without telling anyone." My eyes flicked from Linda, who stood behind him, to his face. I offered a polite smile. "I've been busy. Didn't have time to say much." He wasn't bothered by my indifference and simply smiled, continuing the small talk. "Louis doesn't know either, does he? Just the other day, he mentioned he'd be heading to LA soon for a conference. Said he might visit you while he's there. You should probably let him know you're back, or else he's going to make the trip for nothing." I laughed coldly in my mind. Louis and I had completely fallen out years ago. I'd been in the US for more than 4 years, and he never once tried to contact me. Now that I was back, suddenly he was thinking about visiting? How amusing. Even the polite smile on my face faded as I replied blandly, "My phone was stolen. I lost all my contacts." Jimmy, of course, acted as if he didn't notice the obvious brush-off in my tone. I knew he was doing it on purpose. He'd always been socially astute, a master at reading the room. So he simply smiled and said good-naturedly, "I'll have Elizabeth send you his number later." At the mention of Elizabeth, I finally looked up and gave him a faint, ambiguous smile. I wondered if Elizabeth had had time to tell him about the breakup after our dinner. Then I glanced again at Linda, who was standing behind him a short distance away, nervously glancing in our direction. She looked terrified of me, her expression pale and uneasy. And when I met her gaze, she actually flinched and instinctively took 2 steps back. I let out a cold laugh. Why was she still acting like the same fragile, weepy schoolgirl after all these years? And I still didn't understand. She already had Louis, so why was she still stringing along another man with her ambiguous behavior? What I found even more baffling was what, exactly, these 2 men saw in her. Perhaps there was some hidden brilliance in her I couldn't see. Surely it wasn't just some main character aura, right? I looked away and smiled. President Ellis, you're quite the devoted CEO, so busy every day and yet still managing to personally escort one of your artists to an audition. If word got out, you'd win Best Boss of the Year for sure. He laughed, ignoring the sarcasm in my voice. Then, like he used to when we were younger, he reached out to pat my head. I didn't have time to dodge. It almost felt like he was trying to explain himself earnestly. Don't overthink it. Linda's just timid. And this is a big opportunity for her. I only came to encourage her, as a friend. And besides, I am her boss. I gave a noncommittal smile. Deep down, I felt disgusted, for Elizabeth. No wonder she'd chosen to cut things off so decisively. Jimmy hesitated for a second, then added, "Don't tell Elizabeth." I looked up and feigned innocence. "Why not?" He frowned slightly. Elizabeth has always had some misunderstandings about my relationship with Linda. She even brought up breaking up over it a couple of days ago. I just don't want her to overthink. I scoffed. I had no idea why he seemed so casual about Elizabeth bringing up a breakup. Maybe he thought it was just another little fight, one he could fix with a few sweet words. Typical. Men always think this way. Jimmy told himself that his care for Linda was nothing but pure, righteous friendship. That he had a clear conscience and nothing to hide. But if that were true, if he truly believed there was nothing wrong with it, why was he so afraid of Elizabeth finding out? It was nothing more than self-deception dressed up as nobility. I turned to walk away, but he called after me. "Emma, just so you know, you might run into Louis in the next few days." I rolled my eyes and waved behind me without turning back. Didn't even bother replying. Audition decisions weren't part of my responsibility. At most, I helped the director review footage and offered some feedback from the sidelines. So I hadn't seen Linda's audition tape. Later, I overheard some crew members gossiping. "Hey, the guy who came with Linda the other day wasn't her boyfriend Louis, right?" Nope. I recognized him. That was Jimmy Ellis, the CEO of Kent Group, Linda's boss. Tisk, usually it's agents who come along for auditions. This is the first time I've seen a CEO escort an actress himself. Kinda suspicious, don't you think? I was there for the audition. Linda couldn't even get her lines out properly. Director Lee didn't hold back, he mocked her straight to her face. And that President Ellis actually asked Director Lee to cut her some slack. But Lee said if it weren't for Jimmy's face, Linda wouldn't have even gotten through the front door. Jimmy's expression was pretty ugly after that, but all he did was smile like he was planning something. I've got a feeling this won't be the last we hear of it. Their voices gradually faded. I thought about it for a moment, then sent a message to Elizabeth. "How's the progress on your breakup with Jimmy?" There was no reply for a long while. I figured she was probably busy in the lab with her mentor. I switched off my phone and sighed. Elizabeth really couldn't afford to keep dragging this out. I never understood her patience. I mean, I had really liked Louis back in the day. But the moment he stood up for Linda in front of me, I let go, just like that. I couldn't understand the point of holding on to someone who had someone else in their heart. But Elizabeth? She'd endured it for years. A few days after that thought crossed my mind, I saw Louis again. It was our first meeting since the fallout years ago. He was sitting at the head of the table, representing the investors. When I saw him, I was a bit surprised. But he only smiled, as if he'd expected me all along. Right in front of the director and everyone else, he nodded at me and said with a smile, "Emma, long time no see." The room grew quiet. People turned to look at me, clearly intrigued. I reined in my surprise, returned his smile, and responded with calm composure, "Long time no see." After I took my seat, he turned to the curious onlookers and said, "She grew up in the same compound as me. A neighbor. We used to play together all the time." He sighed, sounding nostalgic. "Then she went abroad for school. Didn't even leave a phone number. If not for this investment dinner tonight, I probably wouldn't have gotten the chance to see her again. His tone was half joking, and the people around us chuckled politely. I sat quietly, smiling without saying much, responding politely when necessary, adding the occasional comment to keep up appearances. After the dinner, I ran into Louis again in the parking lot. He hadn't left. Instead, he was leaning casually against a pillar beside my car, a cigarette between his fingers. He wasn't smoking it, just staring at it. When he heard my footsteps, he looked up, paused for a moment, then smiled. "Emma, are you still mad at me?" I wanted to sigh. Truly. Deeply. Back then, nothing had really happened between Louis, Linda, and me. But after the school anniversary, when I saw Louis and Linda together backstage, I was shocked. That moment stayed with me, and from then on, I started paying closer attention to Linda, only to discover things I'd overlooked before. For instance, she worked part-time at the ice cream parlor where Louis often skipped class to hang out. They seemed to be more familiar with each other than I had imagined. He would sometimes leave a cup of milk tea on her desk when she was hunched over, holding her stomach in pain, as if by accident. And later, when the seating chart changed, he volunteered to sit next to her. From elementary school through middle school, and right up until Linda transferred in, Louis had always sat behind me. He used to joke, "Didn't I promise to always watch your back? Of course I have to stay close." But after he and Linda became desk mates, Elizabeth noticed something wasn't right. She asked me, "Emma, what's going on between you and Louis?" At the time, I kept my head down, staring at my textbook. I was sad, of course, but how was I supposed to explain it? There had never been anything concrete between Louis and me. All those fleeting moments, the hazy ambiguity, the teasing from adults, it was just the stirrings of youth, nothing more. In reality, we weren't anything to each other. So if he liked someone else, if he wanted to sit beside someone else, that was his freedom. I had no right to be angry, no grounds to question him. Everything he did was loud and clear. I wasn't about to throw my pride on the floor and demand an explanation. There was no point. So I pretended nothing had happened and told Elizabeth, "It's nothing. We never had anything. He can do what he wants, it's not my place to interfere." Elizabeth looked at me with sad eyes, as if she wanted to say something but held back. At that time, none of us knew Jimmy also knew Linda. Up until then, I had no ill will toward Linda. Not until I found out the reason she had been admitted into our school was my father. Back when school first started, some classmates had questioned why Linda had been accepted. Her grades weren't outstanding, and a few assumed she must be the daughter of a school staff member. What I hadn't expected was that she wasn't related to any school employee. She was connected to my dad. It was old, messy history. Before my mother, my father had been sent to a rural area for work, and while there, he had dated a woman. Eventually, his family disapproved and forced them apart. Later, he married my mother through an arranged introduction. They were a perfect match, similar in values, supportive of each other. In my memory, they had always been loving and respectful. I don't think my mother ever knew that 2 years ago, Linda's mother had reached out to my father. After breaking up with him back then, she quickly entered an arranged marriage. But luck hadn't been kind. Her husband turned out to be a gambler. While fleeing from debt collectors, he drowned after falling into a river. Left to raise a child alone, she somehow managed to contact my father. Still feeling guilty for the way things had ended between them, my father arranged housing for them in our city, used his connections to get Linda enrolled in our school, and even found a job for her mother. I found out about all this by accident, when I caught him having dinner with Linda at a restaurant near school. It's hard to describe how furious I was at that moment. But I didn't want my mom to find out until I'd confirmed everything. First, I made sure Linda wasn't my half-sister. Then, I gave my father a chance to handle the situation himself. He was flustered and told me he was just helping a former acquaintance's daughter. "She's had it hard," he said. "I just wanted to give her a hand." I stared at him, expressionless. He was trying to treat me like a naive child. There are plenty of ways to help someone. None of them involve giving your ex-girlfriend a job at your own workplace. Or placing her daughter in your own daughter's class. I looked through his phone. Linda's mother had been texting and calling frequently, inviting him over for dinner as a thank you gesture. A woman nearly 40 years old, sending him flirty messages full of soft, sweet tones, dripping with lines like, "If it weren't for your help, we wouldn't have made it. You're our savior." There were no boundaries. Sure, my father had declined her dinner invitations, but he hadn't pushed her away either. I didn't want to hurt my mother. So I gave him time to clean up the mess himself. Somehow, the situation spiraled. Before long, Linda came to me with tears in her eyes, saying that if I wanted to target her, fine, but could I please spare her mother? I was baffled. How had this become my fault? Since when was I the school bully? I'd never even confronted her. Even at that age, I knew the problem wasn't the woman, it was the man. Attacking her wouldn't solve anything. I had originally planned to resolve the matter quietly, sparing Linda and her mother as much embarrassment as possible. Then Louis came to see me. He looked at me with disappointment and said coldly, "Why are you like this? Linda and her mom have no one else in the world. Why do you insist on ruining them?" I was speechless. I didn't like him anymore, but I still saw him as a childhood friend, someone I had grown up with. So I patiently explained everything to him. But then he looked at me and asked, "Are you doing all this to Linda? Because you like me?" I froze. That was the moment everything between us shattered. All those years growing up together suddenly felt meaningless. He had never really known me. And I had never really known him. That promise from our childhood, "I've got your back," now felt like a joke. A slap in the face that finally woke me up. I remember I gave him a faint smile. Then I looked at him coldly and said, "Louis, who do you think you are?" Linda hadn't accepted kindness. So I had no choice but to serve her the consequences. My father was too weak to set boundaries. Too hesitant to speak up. So I stepped in to do it for him. I printed out the messages Linda's mother had sent my father, those gentle affections, thoughtful concerns, and sweet, virtuous words. Along with them, I included a photo of her and Linda together. Then I distributed a copy to every teacher in school. At the Monday morning flag-raising ceremony, while hosting in front of the entire school, I smiled and said, "Linda from Class 6, Grade 11, can you please ask your mother to stop seducing my father? I told you, I've always been kind and soft-hearted." But no one believed me. They treated me like pliable clay, easy to mold. So I had no choice but to show them what I looked like when I wasn't being kind. It caused a huge uproar. Linda voluntarily withdrew from school, though I heard both Louis and Jimmy quietly offered her their help. My mom was worried about my mental state. After a long, heart-to-heart talk that lasted through the night, she went to deal with my father herself. She never let me know what happened. All I know is that before I went abroad, my father was still kneeling in the garden, begging my mother for forgiveness. He refused to agree to a divorce. The past felt like a farce. And now, here Louis stood, acting as if nothing had happened, as if we were simply reminiscing about the good old days, looking wistful as he asked, "Emma, are you still mad at me?" I didn't answer his question. Instead, I changed the subject and asked, "Does Linda know you're asking me that?" My tone was calm, indifferent. I don't know what it reminded him of, but as soon as I said it, he suddenly laughed. His brows lifted, his eyes filled with warmth, he looked genuinely amused. He stepped toward me and said, "Want to grab a meal together? I noticed earlier you barely touched your food at the table." I looked at him coldly. He raised both hands in mock surrender. "Just catching up, no agenda. Let's call it an apology for all my immature behavior back then." I actually laughed. "A meal, and that's your apology? President James, what a grand gesture." He didn't seem to catch the sarcasm. Still smiling, he said, "Then I'll keep treating you until you think it's enough." I looked at him. He was undeniably handsome, and he didn't flinch under my gaze. Honestly, I had no idea what he wanted. So I figured, might as well find out. I was tired of every encounter being filled with vague hints and half-truths. Better to settle it all in one go. For everyone's sake, his, mine, and hers. That dinner with Louis was uninspiring, to say the least. I didn't understand why he kept reminiscing about our childhood. When he asked if I remembered the time, at 16, I'd lined up overnight to get him a limited edition Lego set, I cut him off. "President James," I said, "if you've got something to say, say it. Our time is valuable." He paused, mid-sentence, and just looked at me with a hint of regret. "Emma, we really can't go back, can we?" He said it as if we were some tragic pair ripped straight out of Eileen Chang's Half a Lifelong Romance. I frowned. "It's been 7 years, Louis. I don't know what's left to reminisce about. And if I may remind you, even though I don't like Linda, unless I'm mistaken, she's still your girlfriend." Louis gave a sharp laugh. Ironically, the moment I brought up Linda, the warmth in his expression faded. "She's got a knight in shining armor now, doesn't she?" I found it both absurd and ridiculous, leaving me momentarily speechless. Louis turned to look out the window, expression wistful. "Sometimes I don't even know what's wrong with me," he said. "I really did like Linda back then. I thought she was kind. Strong. I remember once during a play rehearsal, I accidentally stepped on her hand. She went pale from the pain, but bit her lip and didn't move an inch. When I learned about her background, I felt even more for her. When I was younger, I really did love her. I paved the way for her, gave her resources. But all she ever had was that unyielding perseverance. Somehow, it never turned into actual growth. There was a time when my family opposed our relationship. I thought I'd cross mountains for her if I had to. Now that my family started to come around, I just feel like we no longer belong to the same world. I saw the flicker of confusion on his face and found it laughable. Linda, I thought, was really living out the script of a school romance novel. Like one of those campus heroines who only need to be strong, kind, naive, hardworking, and pitifully poor. Whenever trouble arose, the male lead would swoop in from the heavens to save her. But that campus story has ended. It froze at the evil supporting girl flees abroad, loyal male leads stay behind to protect the heroine, kind of grand finale. Real life, however, keeps going. And now, it seems one of those male leads is growing tired of always being the hero. He's tired of Linda still being stuck in her schoolgirl role, strong and hardworking, but with nothing more. But wasn't that exactly what he once loved? I was too tired to play along anymore. So I said, President James, my time is precious. If you're hoping I'll act as your therapist, I'll have to charge extra. He burst out laughing, loud and hearty. After a while, he finally looked at me and asked, Emma, can't we at least be friends? After all, aren't we from the same world? I stood up, picked up my bag, and looked at him with a sigh. Louis, I said, we stopped being friends 7 years ago. Then, after a brief pause, I added, and you and I, we were never from the same world. At that point, I considered the matter closed. From now on, bridges will be bridges, roads will be roads. If we cross paths in the compound, we'll offer a polite nod in passing, nothing more. As far as I'm concerned, this chapter is finished. The next day, a photo of me and Louis made the headlines. The headline was deliberately sensational, Campus Romance in Jeopardy? Rich heir Louis secretly meets with mystery woman, is Linda being cheated on? Of course, the gossip article was quickly taken down, Louis must have pulled some strings. But Linda probably saw it. Just a couple of days later, she appeared in front of me. As a public figure, she'd taken all necessary precautions to disguise herself, dressed in layers, most of her face hidden behind a scarf, sunglasses shielding her eyes. Only when she stood right in front of me did she take off the sunglasses, raise her almond-shaped eyes, and bite her lower lip as she called out, Madison. Miss Madison. I turned around and looked at her. Ever since that incident back then, she'd always been a little afraid of me. It showed in the way she stood in front of me now, slightly cowering. But this time, she had gathered the courage to face me. Even before speaking, her eyes were already red. She said, Miss Madison, I know the person in that photo was you. She was blocking my way, so I stared at her with growing impatience. Yes, it was me. So what? I said flatly. Haven't you asked Louis what we talked about? Her face went pale. She tried to keep her tone steady and composed. I believe Louis. I don't need to ask him, she said. I just hope you can stay away from him. I laughed. For the first time, I looked her straight in the eyes. I must have looked absolutely cold. Then I hope you can say the same thing to yourself and to Louis, I said. I hope both of you can stay away from me. I didn't bother with her any further. I pushed past and walked away. But she called out behind me, Emma Madison. I won't let Louis invest in your film, and I won't be acting in it either. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. After that strange and pointless conversation, Louis did indeed drop his investment. One of the conditions he had proposed was casting Linda as the female lead. But it didn't happen the way Linda claimed. It wasn't that she refused the role. It was that director Lee directly rejected her. The two sides couldn't come to an agreement, so the investment fell through. I found it all absurd and ridiculous. Louis, on one hand, thought Linda was no longer someone who belonged in his world. That entire conversation he had with me that night was just to test whether there was still a possibility for us. He was fully aware of what he was doing. Linda wasn't someone he considered marriage material. So he turned around and told me I was from the same world as him. Maybe he thought that after all these years, I still hadn't let him go. That if he turned back, gave me a nostalgic look, I'd come running into his arms. Where did he get that confidence? He wanted a marriage of equal standing, but also couldn't let go of his savior complex toward Linda. Disgusting. On the day our crew officially began filming, another production team in the industry also announced their launch. It was a huge project backed by Louis and Jimmy. Star producers, acclaimed screenwriters, top-tier actors. All gathered around to support Linda in her role. When I saw the promotional posts from the gossip accounts, I forwarded one to Elizabeth. After a long pause, she replied with 6 dots. The cancellation of her engagement to Jimmy had already been formally communicated to both families. I heard Jimmy was still trying hard to win her back. But even as he tried, he was still publicly going all in for another woman. Truly worthy of the title, devoted second male lead. Elizabeth called me, laughing. I sent that article to my family, she said. They were still hoping I'd give Jimmy another chance. But once they saw that news, they went silent. Then she let out a long sigh and asked in genuine confusion, Emma, what did I even like about Jimmy all these years? It's so strange. It really was strange. But thankfully, she woke up in time. 18 months later, Linda's movie was released. Despite the massive production and the cast full of seasoned actors, the film bombed spectacularly. As the lead actress, Linda was mocked so heavily that she trended several times for all the wrong reasons. With a budget of over $1 billion, the box office barely scraped $3 million. I wondered if the investors wanted to swallow her whole. Oh wait. The investors were Louis and Jimmy. They invested out of love. So now that it had failed so miserably, perhaps they were enjoying it all the same. A month later, the film Linda had refused to act in Ours hit theaters. Because of its depth and themes, it sparked wide discussion and went viral across social media platforms. It broke box office records and topped trending lists. Netizens immediately compared it to Linda's film for contrast and ridicule. The day our movie crossed the $2 billion mark at the box office, that photo of me and Louis having dinner went viral again. The headlines recycled the old narrative, Linda's billionaire boyfriend secretly dines with hit film's creator, infidelity rumors reignite. Conveniently, paparazzi also released blurry photos of Linda out late at night, drinking heavily with friends, looking disheveled and heartbroken. The narrative shifted instantly. And somehow, despite the photo being so grainy, people managed to dig up my personal information with frightening accuracy. No one wanted to talk about the content of our new movie anymore. All they talked about was how tragic Linda was. Some said I had bullied her in high school, forced her to drop out. Others said I was Louis's childhood sweetheart and had been looking for a chance to sabotage them for years. Some even claimed Linda was originally supposed to star in our film, but I had maliciously stolen the role from her. Then one of Linda's friends released a recording. It captured Linda's words from that day she came to confront me. Her friend claimed Linda had just been venting a bit, and that she shared the recording simply to speak up on her friend's behalf. Miss Madison, I know the person in that photo was you. Yes, it was me. So what? I trust Louis. So I don't need to ask him. I just hope you can stay away from him. No one cared about Linda's box office flop anymore, or her disastrous performance. All eyes turned to attack me. Even our film, still showing in theaters, was impacted. For the first time, I reached out to Louis. Aren't you going to come forward and clarify things? There was a long pause on the other end before he finally replied, Emma, just take it as me owing you a favor. Linda needs a distraction. Your film broke $2 billion in just 3 days. You have a bright future ahead of you. You've already got everything. But Linda, she can't afford to lose anything else. I stayed calm. So you're not planning to clarify it? I asked. More silence. I gave a small laugh. I wasn't even angry, just disgusted. Louis, I said, do you think I'm the nanny for you and Linda, this crazy little pair of yours? What does anything I have to do with you two? Why should I be the one to carry the weight of your scandals? Am I mentally ill? I hung up right after that. That phone call was the last ounce of kindness I could offer. That night, I issued a public statement. First, regarding the rumor that I had bullied Linda in high school. What a coincidence. I still had screenshots of her mother trying to seduce my father back then. Second, the recording of that dinner with Louis. Yes, these days, who doesn't know how to record conversations? While Linda had only released a selective snippet, I posted the entire thing. Including the part where I asked Louis to publicly clarify the truth, and what he said in response, Emma, just take it as me owing you a favor. Linda needs a distraction. You have everything now. But Linda, she can't lose anything else. Third, the claim that Linda was originally supposed to star in our film. I posted her audition video, director Lee's in-person critique, and later, the fact that Louis tried to use his investment as leverage, only to be rejected by director Lee on the spot. The evidence was irrefutable, clearly laid out. In the end, I tagged both Linda and Louis and wrote, you've messed with the wrong person. Don't play dead, apologize. Or I'll take legal action for defamation and slander. The gossip-loving public was thoroughly entertained. The narrative flipped completely. If I were Linda, I'd be considering moving to another planet. The James family's stock price nosedived. But what I truly appreciated was the netizens' attention to detail. Someone dug into Linda's audition tape and uncovered Jimmy's involvement. They asked, why do Linda and this guy seem a little too close? Naturally, once you start digging, everything comes out. Linda stayed silent about everything else, but she responded quickly to this, saying, he's just a friend and a boss. At that point, Elizabeth made a Weibo account. She tagged Jimmy and posted an official statement announcing their broken engagement, effectively nailing the two of them to the ambiguous relationship wall. Public opinion exploded. Meanwhile, our film's box office kept soaring. I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the golden dusk. What a breathtaking scene, I thought. Later, Jimmy came looking for me. He looked worn down, exhausted. Do you know where Elizabeth is? He asked. Oh, Elizabeth had started seeing her senior from the research institute. They'd gone home together to meet her parents just last week. Jimmy must have heard. But now, he couldn't find her. Couldn't see her. She was at the National Research Institute. Without clearance, he'd never be able to reach her again. I said, "What's wrong, Sir Knight? Isn't this the time Linda needs you most? Why are you asking about Elizabeth?" He gave a bitter smile and shook his head, words failing him. Then he left, looking completely defeated. As for Louis, it seemed he was being set up for arranged dates lately. With his family's stock hit hard and their market share declining, they were eager to form a proper alliance through marriage to stabilize things. But that whole scandal had blown up too badly. Apparently, there was little progress. After all, who hadn't heard that infamous quote from him, "Emma, just take it as me owing you a favor. Linda needs a distraction. You've already got everything. But Linda, she can't afford to lose anything else." He couldn't reach me. Later, he even tried sending people to contact me. But I remained unmoved. Eventually, he gave up. As for their tragic high school soap opera, I want no part in it. From now on, we'll never meet again.